Finally happening. We're doing a panda review of a 2600 game. It's kind of crazy that we haven't, given how much we talk about Atari. Kelly lives entirely off of Atari tokens at this point, and I have like four different Atari devices. So, I mean, it's surprising that we made it this far. What's more surprising is it's not going to be the game you'd expect. Obviously, I'm not talking about the masterpiece. I think we can agree that is Beat 'em and Eat 'em. It's not going to be that because we're going to do our first annual beat off next year. So trophies in the works, everything. You guys will love it. But we're going to talk about one of the more famous, I would say, sci-fi games for the platform, but not the one you're thinking. Because the one you're thinking is the greatest sci-fi game for the platform, and it's not ET.
Yeah, that'd be too easy. Although we should probably do an ET review sometime.
We should. Do you have a copy?
I do.
A
Had to
physical
go
copy?
had to go dig it out of a dump, but I got one.
Nice, nice. But we're going to talk about Berserk, and we're going to talk about the 2600 version, not the arcade version, and not the later upgraded voice enhanced version. So just the standard 2600 edition. There was some confusion between us trying to figure out which one we are going to do at first. So I just want to make it clear to everybody else. So Kelly, what's your introduction to this game? Because this is an older game now. This came out the year I was born, so 1,000 years ago. What what was your introduction to this?
So 2000 years ago when I was born. Yeah, because well, I guess the 2600 game came out then because so I was a big Berserk arcade fan. So when that was in the arcades, that was one of my go-tos. Enjoyed it. Defender was, we've talked about it before. Joust and Defender, probably my favorite. Going to the arcade to play, but Berserk was up there too. It was always a really enjoyable game to play. And um, so you get burned on the Pac-Man port. Pac-Man, I don't know if you're familiar, folks familiar, that was a pretty good arcade game as well. Um, until Atari,
It's got a little cult following.
a little bit of fans there, and the Atari version for the 2600, largely attributed for the downfall of Atari. It was like because it came out with a big price tag, a lot of
I think this guy
anticipation.
played a part too.
Yes, that um, I guess the um, one was the guillotine, the other one was kicking the head down the road kind of thing. Put them in either order, however you like to, but it certainly was a contributing factor. Um, the just weird, some of the really weird decisions that were made with the port. One of the biggest you want the game to look kind of like the game. That's what you expect when you drop down a premium price for an Atari 2600 cartridge. And the dots aren't dots in Pac-Man; they're wafers, they're lines. And it's set up on a horizontal layout versus a vertical layout, which I kind of get that's the Atari screen ish. Although Yar's Revenge plays a lot more vertical, in my opinion, than this is clearly a landscape Pac-Man maze. And just a lot of things about it not good, but that's not the game we're talking about there. So always some hesitancy on wondering how well Atari could pull off an arcade analog onto their system, also recognizing the 2600's not exactly got the horsepower to match up with Dragon's Lair, let's say. So there's going to be a few challenges, but pleasantly surprised because so I didn't go for it right away, but when I eventually did say, I'd really like Berserk though, I want to get a copy of it. So once I got a copy of Berserk, I was pleased. I was like, recognizing the system it's on, I was like, this this gives me a Berserk arcade vibe to the degree it needs to for me to be a happy person. So that was kind of my path. And you?
And so I actually didn't play Berserk initially. So Atari 2600, It was a little bit before me. I grew up in the NES era, but everybody still had their 2600s. I mean, people still have them now, the original ones, but Atari 2600 was still in everybody's house. So I played plenty of Atari 2600 games. I don't think I actually played Berzerk at the time, though. I do remember seeing it, but it was something I didn't play until later. Maybe like pre-emulation, but some sort of like an Atari collection on something is when I would have initially played it. And I don't know why. There was no specific reason. In fact, looking back at it, because I was checking out the instruction manual and things like that online, it's got a lot of really cool artwork. And this would be a good time to kind of throw in, since this is our first time talking a 2600 game in an official Panda review capacity. Atari had some of the best artwork for their games and for their boxes. And I understand they really had to sell it because of the kind of primitive graphics you had back then. There was a lot that was left to the imagination, a lot of blanks for you to fill in. But it is really incredible artwork. Not that the 16-bit, the later 8-bit and 16-bit era didn't have great covers and artwork as well. There's just something extra to those Atari games where they just really went all out with paintings and illustrations and things like that. And Berserk has a particularly good one. I think maybe I just wasn't super into sci-fi stuff at the time. And I played a lot of Yars Revenge. I absolutely love that game. So I think that kind of filled that void for me at the time.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, and I guess good caveat there because we have talked about a 2600 game. I know there's one game you've wanted to try and talk about a lot, and we've talked about a couple 2600 games on our Bog Panda After Dark, which would have gotten to a game Mike mentioned a little bit earlier. But we also talked about Halloween uh,
Yes.
in the past, which uh, will not fare well on a Panda review, but it hasn't been subjected to one yet. But Berserk gets the honors, and we'll just go ahead and get started. As a reminder for you folks scoring at home, it's 1 to 5 pandas, five being the best. And then when we get to visual appeal towards the end, that we do need to factor in for given the platform so that we kind of keep it a level playing field. And difficulty, also, again, it's not like fives, too easy, too hard. It's just like, is it right size? Is it the right level of difficulty to keep you interested in coming back? So it's just a little background there, but 1 to 5 pandas, and we'll score them up. And then in the comments on the YouTube video, you'll see how the other games stacked up on there. So with that, we'll get started. And the first category is fun factor. Um, I'm going to go with 4 on this because I liked Berserk. I like Atari 2600 Berserk. I enjoy playing it. So it's a solid 4 for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the four as well. I think it's a simplistic game. And I think that that works best on Atari 2600. There are more complex games, and then of course the stuff that people are doing in the homebrew scene is way above and beyond what was even capable, 40 years ago. Not that obviously the system is capable of pulling it off, but we've learned so much, and people way smarter than me have learned so much about programming on 2600 that they can force, a higher level out of that system than people could have at that time. So I think the more simplistic games tended to be better. And that's where, like we mentioned in the After Dark special, where we talked about Beat 'em and Eat 'em, one of the greatest games. A lot of those games don't really hold up because it's just kind of a joke and it's not designed around the limitations of the hardware in a way that makes it work and makes it intriguing for you to come back once the joke wears off. Where's the replay value in those games other than Beat 'em and Eat 'em? Where's the replay value to keep bringing you back? So something like this, I feel like does bring that replay value. And also too, and I should have probably mentioned this in the beginning. Have you seen the movie Nightmares?
No, that's not by Blue Oyster Cult, right? Just
No, no. It's an 80s horror movie. We could do a whole show on the background of the movie, so I'm not going to do that. The movie's largely kind of forgotten now. Its big claim to fame now is that it's actually the first movie to have a entirely CGI rendered character in it. And it came out in the 80s and it predates Tron, which is what most people associate with CGI in movies. Nightmares came out first. It has a fully CGI character in there named the Bishop of Battle, and it's a boss character that comes out of an arcade game when Emilio Estevez, pre-fame Emilio Estevez, plays it in an arcade that he sneaks into at night to try and beat the game and chases him around. And it's very much like the Evil Otto character in this. So I have to imagine that that was the inspiration for it. That and the kind of wireframe Atari Star Wars games, because the game itself is portrayed as more of a wireframe Star Wars kind of game. But the wireframe boss character that comes out and chases around looks a lot like if you rendered Evil Otto that way in the Star Wars game. So the fun factor is a four for me as well, but it's also tied to a weird sort of tangential nostalgia of loving that game Nightmare and then playing this and understanding that that was probably the inspiration for it.
Yeah, well, we'll have to go back to and check. So, Young Sherlock Holmes was another one that had uh, in fact, multiple movies have laid claim to. We were the first one to use CGI, so I have to see where that falls too, because that one had the um, stained glass mirror knight come out of the stained
Okay.
glass and
Yeah,
be
no,
there.
no. Nightmares is in like Guinness Book and all that kind of stuff. So that's the one that owns the title. As far as I'm concerned, that's the one that owns the title. It's the first fully CGI character, and I think it was a situation where someone else had that title first, and because Nightmares was kind of forgotten about, I guess the producers came out and were like, "Hey, this is like '84 or whatever it came out." So
Okay, all right, we'll check on that somewhere on there. There's probably been on your screen the dates, the release dates of these.
yeah, it didn't come out
Uh,
in '84. I don't remember what it was. It's
we'll
it's down there. Go watch the movie though. Seriously, it's really
yeah,
fun.
we'll do, and you'll know if Mike's life has been nothing but one big lie. Has he been living a lie? But it's truth is on screen. Cool. So next we'll go to controls. Uh, so this was a hard one for me to score because there is absolutely nothing wrong. There's probably no game better suited for the Atari 2600 controller than Berserk. So it's a pure joystick game. Your fire button is of no use to you. It's just it's like, well, I shouldn't say it's of no use to you. You use it to fire, but it's just basic fire button and motion kind of stuff. Really straightforward. Um, and so there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but it's also like there's no creativeness either it's a pretty straightforward problem to solve. So I struggled kind of hitting it with a five for this. So I went with four. Again, nothing wrong with it. I think the Atari 2600 is a perfect game controller to play Berserk because, again, you need motion and fire, and that's it. So I thought it was good that way. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm kind of landing in the same place again. I think I'm going to go with a four. The controls work perfectly for what they're supposed to do. It's a simple game. And there were some more complex games at that time, and certainly followed shortly after a lot more complex games than this. So, but I mean, this was out around the same time as like Yours Revenge, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, probably about the same.
Yeah, and that I mean, again, that's pretty simplistic and straightforward, but has a little more going on than this does. So again, I'm with Kelly. I think it works perfectly, but it's simple.
So next is difficulty. As kind of mentioned earlier, that's just kind of right sizing it for repeat play. While I thought the programmers did an excellent job in recreating the basic feel of Berserk and the look of Berserk and the enjoyment of Berserk on there. I think, maybe it's not entirely fair to compare it to the arcade game, but the arcade game, I think, does a much better job in starting to kind of ratchet up your difficulty as you make progress, but not in a brutally unfair way, but you get pressed more and more. The Evil Otto uh, can play a much more troubling role in the arcade version than he does here. Is more predictability, I think, in the 2600 version. He's also silent in the 2600 version, which is kind of a weird Evil Otto to deal with. But from a difficulty perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it's just the same thing you see in a lot of Atari games that it starts to get pretty repetitive in terms of when you go up levels or go into different rooms, that there can be a higher level of diversity, which kind of makes things a little bit more difficult. So it's a reluctant three pandas. Again, it's again nothing wrong with it. I really do enjoy this game, but if I have to be kind of true to, is this difficulty like have they really dialed it into the right type of thing? I think it just suffers from what many Atari 2600 games suffer from, which is there's only a certain level of diversity and challenge you can introduce in a multi-level experience type of thing. So I'm going to go with a three.
Did you ever watch that '70s show?
I tried to limit my viewing of it. I've seen probably four partial episodes.
Actually, I'm about the same. And it's weird because when it was on Netflix, I turned it on to watch it a couple times because I knew a few people who really enjoyed it and instantly fell asleep as soon as I put it on. So I've slept through like a whole season of the show. So maybe somewhere deep down inside, I have this subconscious knowledge of the show, but I've never really consciously watched an entire episode all the way through. There was a time, though, when I woke up and there was an episode playing where two of the characters were discussing Atari 2600 and how they, whatever game they were really into, it had kind of was losing its luster because there wasn't enough variety in the game. So they were trying to modify the controller themselves to make the game more difficult. So kind of to what you were saying, that was something they were making fun of on the show. So I thought that was interesting. Now the game, the Atari 2600 cartridge does allow you to change like game modes where you can like turn Evil Otto off and things like that in there. So I guess that adds a slight amount of variety. But once you have it down, like Kelly was saying, like, making it easier isn't going to give you more replayability at that point. So I'm going to be a three as well. We're really neck and neck. I'm really waiting to see where we fall with graphics on this one.
Um, so next one's replay appeal. Um, Another one that I struggled with because I do really like Berserk. I have replayed the arcade version of Berserk a lot on my At Games Legends Ultimate. Uh, Not so much on my Super Console X, but on my At Games I have because it's kind of an arcade feel to it. Um, and not that my Atari 2600 games are in like high rotation in terms of if I go to, I'm going to play some games for a while. It's not often beyond, of course, watching the enjoying Session on the Atari 2600 off the movie card. That's on regular rotation. But outside of that, not heavy rotation. But even then, when I flip it open and I see Berserk, and I know how much I like Berserk, and I know how well Atari executed this Berserk, um, it doesn't come out of the holder as often as I would like. So I'm kind of go with the replay based on my experience. I'm gonna go three again for replayville, and I think that comes back a little bit to the difficulty conversation, which is I've kind of done this book. I kind of know what it is, and so even if I do start to replay it, I'm probably not going to be playing it a long time. It'll be kind of like, oh yeah, okay, now I've got it down. Okay, well that's enough. So I'm gonna go with the three again.
Yeah, I think we're lined up again on this one. I'm going to say three. And honestly, the reason I'm saying three is because obviously people are still playing this game, still talking about this game. It's considered a classic. So there is replay value there and there is nostalgia for a lot of people. And for people who didn't grow up with it, who are just interested in retro games, it's one of those games you're going to come across because so many people talk about it. So I do think there's value there in going back and playing it. Um, at the same time, though, like I recently, if you go back and watch our episodes on my Odyssey on getting this, in order to play the movie cards, I had to get an original Atari 2600. So I purchased a Vader, and unfortunately, it came broken. So there was a whole thing I had to go through to get another one, but I did eventually get that. And I have purchased a few Atari 2600 cartridges to play on there to have physical cartridges to play. But the reality is, as we alluded to in the beginning, I have so many ways to play Atari games. I have the Atari Fight Stick. I have the X games. I have Super Console X. I have Atari collections for my Evercade. I just have so many ways to play all these games. Am I going to buy a physical copy of Berserk? Is that one of those games that I need to have that physical copy that I can pop in every once in a while to play to get that authentic experience? Probably not. So that's where I'm falling on the three on this one.
Okay. And then the final category is visual appeal, using the Atari 2600 curve.
Yeah, this is
Um,
this is probably the steepest grading on a curve when it comes to Atari 2600. Out of all the systems we'll eventually get around to covering, this is the steepest grade on a curve, I would think.
yeah. And it's interesting because I think if we get to it at some point, if we get like to Pitfall, I think when you start to think what are like the top Atari 2600 games that really kind of do some nice stuff visually. Things like Pitfall come to mind. Pole Position, I think, actually does a pretty good job too. Um, so, and they're really kind of pushing the limits of Atari to a degree. Um, Through no fault of their own, Berserk is not a visual experience that is challenging because it is the arcade version. I don't know, three colors, four colors. You got the robots are a color, you're a color, the lines. Otto might be a different color. So it's not like a rich and lush visual landscape, and it's lines. Hey, here's a wall, here's a door, here's a robot that's a pretty straightforward looking sprite, but clearly a robot and clearly a menacing robot. It's looking to take you out. Um, Otto is, not exactly the most complex execution either, as a large bouncing smiley face. But so while it wasn't super difficult to replicate the arcade stuff, it was part of it because it was a pretty simplistic interface to begin with. So I go with a four again. Just I couldn't push it to five, even though I think really in terms of all the Atari executions, this one's probably as close to the arcade version as you're going to get in terms of look. But um, I'm still going to kind of stick with a four.
Yeah, this one was actually the hardest one for me because I do really understand the grading on a curve for this. Um, and to Kelly's point, its biggest strength is it does look like it's instantly recognizable as Berserk. If you played the Berserk arcade game at all, and then somebody showed you this, you understand immediately that this is Berserk. It looks like the arcade game. I mean, there's some, little tweaks and things like that, but it's the art. This isn't like Pac-Man, where like it's kind of like it's a Pac-Man esque experience, I guess, kind of thing. This looks and plays like Berserk. So in that sense, it would be like a five because it's a near perfect arcade port for Atari 2600, but I can't give it a five because to Kelly's point, not only are there games that look better, but and this is where it's tough because like use of color, I think is the weakest part of Atari 2600 graphics because when you get into games that don't just use the black background with an environment and basic sprites on there, they can look muddy when there's just, a big plane that's brown for the ground or blue for the sky and things like that. It looks like muddy and overpowering, like oversaturated with certain colors. But then there's games like Star Wars, the Empire Strikes Back game, which used color really, really well. Like that's an excellent use of color in that game. When we eventually get to that, that's going to be the main thing that I talk about. And then there's some games that look really good. Like I Kelly mentioned Pitfall. I would say Solaris for Atari 2600 is a great looking game. That is the graphics in that game are surprising given the era that it came out in. That's not it's an original game. It's not like a later homebrew game or anything like that. So I mean, there's way better on the system than this, but at the same time, it looks like the source material, which is what it's supposed to do. So it's really tough for me. So I'm probably going to go with a four as well, just because it so closely mimics the original source material, but doesn't push the system in any way.
Makes sense. All right, then. So for totals, we matched category for category this time through.
Yeah,
So if my math is right, that's 18 apiece. So we're both at 18 for this game. So where that kind of nets out, as you see on the screen here, is that this is now the eighth game we've reviewed, our first official Atari 2600 game. Number one for Mike continues to be Road Rash, logging in a powerful 25, all fives on that. Pokemon Snap for me from the Nintendo 64 with 22 is my number one because I'm a more strict grader than Mike, apparently. And he drank the Genesis Road Rash Kool-Aid. But for Berserk, they both come in at 18, which of the seven games we reviewed on Mike's list, that now means eight games, and it's coming in at ahead of Alien Trilogy for the PlayStation, but just behind Jaws, kind of the bottom of the list. Uh, Comparable location for me, oddly enough, between Jaws and Alien Trilogy as well. Just maybe a slot higher because I've got Paperboy down low, which I'm sure still continues to pain Mike, but that's the way that goes. So it's a 2600 game. I still think it did pretty good, and we'd recommend this game for folks on the 2600. But the Panda review is the Panda review. You can't challenge science, so that's where it sits.
I'm a doctor.
Panda review is the Panda review. You can't challenge science.
Doctors do science.
That's not a like counter there. That's true. So excellent, good. Well, it's fun. Yeah, I do think that there are a few games out there that we really need to get to at some point in time. And then I do think also we've tended to pick games that we actually kind of enjoy anyway so far. But I think we do need at some point to pick one of these less enjoyable things. Maybe a prop mic has shown up, which could possibly be a review. But that's a lot of people have kind of weighed in that you know bad game, ET game bad. Um, but we'll see. We'll look around. If there's something you'd like us to review, let us know in the comments. Best way to stay on top of future reviews from us, which I'm sure you've been fascinated by this one, would be to subscribe to the Bog Panda YouTube channel. Hit that bell to be notified when it's updated. And in addition to future Panda reviews, you'll also receive free of charge a daily podcast called Hard No. It's the world's shortest podcast. By the time this video comes out, we'll be going into a new chapter of Hard No with new questions and a new territory that I just like to continue to clarify every opportunity I can get. Not my fault. A lot of the questions coming through Hard No are mic questions, so there's that. So keep that in mind. But still, it's fun. So you should check out Hard No. It's only a minute every day. Check them out. I've got some merchandise. You can take a peek at that. Check out our website. Be sure if you go
Take
to
a
our
peek at Kelly's merchandise.
uh, if you go to our website, be sure to check out Bog Panda Vision. That's we are minor league homebrew developers, and occasionally one of us hires an upper league homebrew developer. So there's a few things out there, some free ROMs you can download, an online game or two, and then hopefully some more stuff coming soon. So check that all out. Basically, everything on Bog Panda Vision is completely free of charge as well because we care about you.